The Sangre de Cristo Conspiracy. Chapter 2. The Marshal's Road. The 70 miles from Taos to Santa Fe were a crucible, designed by a harsh god to test the mettle of any man or beast foolish enough to traverse them. For Ignacio, alcalde de Vigila's young deputy, their journey was a frantic blur of dust, desperation, and the rhythmic, punishing gait of his increasingly wary horse. He rode with the urgency of a man carrying a lit fuse, the image of Don Carlos Montoya's lifeless form and the alcalde's grim pronouncements burning in his mind. The sun beat down, relentless, and the landscape, a vast panorama of ochre, rust, and distant blue mountains, offered little comfort. Only a stark reminder of the untamed nature of this New Mexico territory. He pushed his mount, a sturdy but unremarkable gelding, harder than he should have, driven by a primal fear of what Montoya's murder signified. It wasn't just the death of one man, however prominent. It was the potential unraveling of the fragile peace that barely held in the Taos Valley. A peace strained by the influx of American traders, the simmering resentment of displaced Spanish loyalists, and the ever-present, watchful eyes of the Pueblo communities who had seen empires come and go. Ignacio, though young, understood the delicate balance. Montoya's death, and the theft of the legendary cash, was a boulder dropped into a still pond, its ripples already spreading with alarming speed. He bypassed the smaller settlements, the scattered ranchos and dusty villages. His focus, singular. Reach Santa Fe. Find Marshal Hartwell. He'd heard tales of the Marshal, a man who had once worn the blue of the American Army, but now wore the badge of the Mexican territorial law. A man said to be as hard as the Malpais rock that littered the desert floor, yet fair. More importantly, he was an outsider, beholden to neither the local Taos factions nor the increasingly vocal American merchant contingent. If anyone could untangle this bloody knot, it was Hartwell. Ignacio's throat was parched, his lips cracked, and every muscle screamed in protest when he finally spotted the low-slung adobe buildings of Santa Fe, nestled at the root of the Sangre de Cristos, which here seemed less menacing, more like ancient slumbering guardians. He didn't slow his pace until he reached the governor's palace, its imposing facade a symbol of the distant authority of Mexico City. Marshal Samuel "Sam" Hartwell was in the midst of a far less dramatic, though equally frustrating, piece of territorial business when Ignacio, coated in dust and near collapse, was announced. Hartwell, 34 years of age, possessed features that spoke of long days under a relentless sun and nights spent with too little sleep. His steel gray eyes, however, were sharp and missed little, a legacy of his years as an army officer navigating the complexities of frontier outposts before the lure of this raw, vibrant land had convinced him to trade his military commission for a marshal's star. He was in the cramped office provided to him, listening to a verbose merchant complain about a stolen shipment of indigo. A theft, Hartwell suspected, was more likely an insurance scheme than the work of actual bandits. "Marshal Hartwell," Ignacio gasped, leaning against the doorframe for support, his chest heaving. Hartwell rose, his movements economical, a habit ingrained from years where wasted motion could mean the difference between life and death. He was not a large man, but he carried himself with an undeniable presence. His Spanish, learned not in classrooms, but in dusty cantinas and around lonely campfires, was fluent, almost unaccented. See? What is it, son? You look like you've wrestled with a whirlwind.
It is Don Carlos Montoya, Marshal, the administrador de aduanas in Taos.
Ignacio paused, struggling for breath.
He has been murdered, killed in his hacienda. And the Sangre de Cristo cash, it is gone.
The merchant's complaints about indigo vanished from Hartwell's mind. Montoya, he knew the man. Efficient, a little too proud of his position, but a key figure in the territorial administration. In the Sangre de Cristo cache, Hartwell had heard the whispers, the legends of Spanish gold hidden during the Pueblo revolt. If Montoya had found it, and it was now stolen along with his life, this was no simple robbery. This was dynamite. Murdered? Hartwell's voice was level, but a new intensity sharpened his gaze. When? How? Ignacio, revived slightly by a dipper of water Hartwell offered, recounted what he knew. Maria's discovery, the ransacked study, the empty strongbox, the nature of the wound that suggested a powerful rifle, and Alcalde Vigil's immediate suspicion of the American traders. Hartwell listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. He knew Taos, a beautiful, volatile place, a place where cultures clashed like flint and steel, often throwing off dangerous sparks. The hawk and rifle was a telling detail. Such weapons were indeed favored by the mountain men, but they were also becoming more common among anyone who valued accuracy and power. To leap to the conclusion that it must be an American was premature and dangerous.
The alcalde sends me to fetch you, Marshal,
Ignacio concluded, his voice regaining some of its strength.
He says the valley is on the brink. He fears war.
Hartwell nodded slowly. War was perhaps an exaggeration, but widespread violence? Entirely possible. He felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He was an American, yes, by birth and by past service, but his loyalty now was to the law of this territory, a territory struggling to find its footing under a new flag. He believed in order, in justice, but he was learning that in New Mexico, these concepts were as shifting and multifaceted as the desert light. Get some rest, son, Hartwell told Ignacio, his tone softening slightly. Find the livery, and get your horse seen to, and get yourself some food. I'll inform Governor Narbona. I ride for Taos within the hour. His own horse, a tough, intelligent buckskin named Diablo, was always kept ready. Hartwell's preparations were swift. A bedroll, saddlebags packed with essentials, extra ammunition, dry jerky, a small pouch of coffee, his official papers, and his Colt Patterson revolver, cleaned and oiled, settled into its holster. He strapped on his gun belt, the weight familiar and strangely comforting. His hawk and rifle, a twin to the type, now implicated in Montoya's death, was already in its scabbard on Diablo's saddle. It was a tool, nothing more. But in the wrong hands, or in a climate of fear, it could become a symbol of accusation. The thought that Montoya might have been involved in a clandestine deal to sell off parts of the treasure, even as he proclaimed it a boon for the Mexican government, was a disturbing possibility. It added a layer of complexity that went far beyond simple robbery by disgruntled traders. Across town, in a secluded aspen grove, high on a ridge overlooking the valley, Eli Bayard Thompson sat with three of his most trusted companions. The smoke from their small, carefully concealed fire rose straight up in the still air. Thompson, a man whose massive frame and grizzled beard gave him the appearance of his namesake, listened intently as one of the men, a wiry Delaware Indian named Swift Otter, who often scouted for the trappers, recounted what he'd seen and heard in the pueblo and around the edge of Taos. "The Mexicans are angry, Bear," Swift Otter said, his English accented but clear. "They blame the Long Knives. They say a rifle like yours killed Montoya." Thompson's face, usually as expressive as weathered granite, showed a flicker of concern. He was a man who valued his freedom above all else. The freedom of the mountains, the freedom from the petty squabbles of settlements. But he also felt a responsibility to the men who looked to him as a leader. If the Mexicans started a witch hunt, his trappers would be easy targets. "Montoya was a fool," Thompson rumbled, his voice like stones grinding together. "He flashed his newfound wealth like a cheap trinket. And this treasure, it's old magic, bad medicine. Should have stayed buried." He had a deep respect for the ancient spirits of this land, and a respect learned from men like Swift Otter. He knew the Pueblo elders considered the Sangre de Cristo mountains sacred, and any disturbance of things long hidden there was bound to bring trouble. "What do we do, Bear?" asked another trapper, a young man named Billy Sykes, his face pale under his tan. "Do we scatter? Head further into the Unitas?" Thompson shook his head. "Running makes us look guilty. We stay. We watch. We listen. This Marshal Hartwell. Swift Otter, you know of him?" Swift Otter nodded. "He speaks truth, mostly. Not like other soldiers. He listens to the wind, to the earth. Maybe he will listen to us." "Maybe," Thompson said, unconvinced. He trusted few men who wore a badge, regardless of the government it represented. But he also knew that hiding in the mountains wouldn't solve anything if the entire territory was inflamed. He had his own network, men scattered through the high country, eyes and ears that missed little. They would know if any trapper had been foolish enough to get involved in Montoya's death. For now, his primary concern was protecting his own, and that meant understanding the true nature of the storm that had just broken over Taos. It was late afternoon when Marshal Sam Hartwell finally rode into the Taos Plaza. The usual vibrant energy was gone, replaced by palpable tension. Groups of men stood talking in low, anxious voices, their eyes following him with a mixture of hope and suspicion. The air felt thick, charged. He dismounted in front of the alcalde's office, the dust of his journey settling on his worn leather chaps. Alcalde Juan Bautista Vigil emerged, his face a mask of strained relief and lingering fury.
Marshal Hartwell, gracias a Dios. You made good time.
Alcalde, Hartwell acknowledged with a nod. Your man Ignacio painted a grim picture. I need to see the Montoya Hacienda. I need to hear everything you know and everything you suspect. Vigil launched into a rapid-fire account, his gestures emphatic, his voice rising as he recounted the discovery of the missing strongbox, his conviction that American traitors were to blame.
They resented his taxes, Marshal. They operate outside our laws, flaunting their wealth, disrespecting our officials. This is an outrage, an act of war.
Hartwell listened patiently, letting the alcalde vent. He understood the man's anger, his fear for his community, but he also heard the rhetoric of a man quick to judgment, perhaps overlooking other possibilities. The treasure, alcalde, Hartwell interjected when Vigil paused for breath. The Sangre de Cristo cache. What can you tell me about that? Was its existence widely known? Vigil hesitated.
Don Carlos, he was discreet, but also proud. He spoke of it to some. He believed it would be the salvation of the territory's finances. Gold, jewels, ancient chalices from the missions. A king's ransom.
And who knew of its location besides Montoya?
He never told me directly. He was secretive about the exact place. Said it was secure.
Vigil's eyes narrowed.
Do you think this is about more than the tax money, Marshal?
Hartwell looked towards the towering peaks, now tinged with the orange and purple hues of the approaching sunset. Don Carlos Montoya was a customs official found murdered, his strongbox emptied, and a legendary treasure he supposedly rediscovered is also missing, alcalde. I think this is about a great deal more than any of us yet understand. His gaze swept the plaza, lingering for a moment on the sign of Elena Vasquez's trading post. He knew his investigation would start at the scene of the crime, but sooner rather than later, all roads and tolls, it seemed, led to Elena. And he had a feeling that the road solving this conspiracy would be as treacherous and winding as any mountain pass.